Друзья, начнем. Я вывел на экраны. Вот мы так вот делаем сейчас. Я вывел на экраны тот текст, который мы сейчас будем читать. Может быть, я просил бы кого-нибудь, кто у нас здесь согласен взять на себя сейчас роль нашего чтеца. Лариса, согласны?
Да, могу, конечно.
Хорошо.
Читаем, да?
Да, давайте.
Кай excelten ho Iisus, kai hoi matetai autu, eis tas komas, Caesareas tes Filipu, kai ente hodo, eperota tus matetas autu, legun autois, tina me legusin hoi antropoi einai. Дальше
Спасибо.
весь отрывок.
Нет, давайте. Мне кажется, это отрывок такой, что заслуживает того, чтобы его читать медленно, стих за стихом. Иисус и его ученики направились в селение близ Кесарии Филипповой. По дороге он спросил учеников, кем люди считают меня. И мы подходим в данном случае к может быть, центральному переломному моменту во всем повествовании, да? Исповедание Иисуса Мессии. Готовясь к нашей сегодняшней встрече, я посмотрел комментарий Джоэля и увидел там несколько интересных вещей, которые служат обсуждению даже еще до того, как мы перейдем к обсуждению собственного текста. Joel, I just said that while preparing for our meeting of today, I looked into your commentary and I saw there some moments that I think we may or even must develop on even before proceeding to the dialogue itself between Jesus and the disciples. Wait a second. I'll also start the recording. А я не могу сделать recording. Леня, вы с нами?
Да, идет запись у меня. Я не знаю, почему вы не можете сейчас. Но у меня запись идет, все в порядке.
Хорошо. Тогда мы с вами потом свяжемся, чтобы проверить, что запись была, да?
Угу.
Потому что иногда в облаке запись пропадает. Мы сейчас делаем в облако запись, правильно?
Я переставил на свой компьютер.
А вы переставили на свой компьютер. Понятно, хорошо. Окей.
А там вроде бы появлялось в начале сообщение, что идет запись, так что все хорошо должно быть.
Окей. Она просто, когда делается в облако, то она потом иногда исчезает. So this was just a small discussion about technical problems of our meeting.
Whenever I have a technical problem, I try to find a young person.
Yes, it's a good idea.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's They're natives of this country.
Yes. In your commentary, you mentioned that the reference to Caesarea Philippi may be meaningful in this context. And wait a second, I'll find this place and quote you. It's your note to 8:27.
Mhm.
Caesarea Philippi.
Mhm.
Upper Galilee is linked in ancient Jewish sources with visionary activity and ascent to the heavenly temple.
Mhm.
I think that probably it's worth looking at the geographical context of the geographical setting of our story.
Yeah, I didn't remember I said that, but I see that I say it.
Okay. Yes, so that's the map for the northmost part of Israel, and that's Caesarea Philippi. What is the correct English pronunciation of this geographical name?
In English, I guess we say Caesarea Philippi.
Philippi. Okay.
Yep. I don't know why, but
Okay, Caesarea Philippi. This is just under the highest mountain here, the only mountain in this region that is covered with snow, Mount Hermon. And you see this is just below the mountain.
Mhm.
So probably the fact that the revelation, the turning point in the narrative, the relation of the messianic dignity of Jesus takes place here because it's natural in human traditions to link visions and revelations with mountains. Definitely, Mount Hermon is the mountain for this region. Even more interesting were the references that you also mentioned. I didn't think about this earlier. To first Enoch.
Mhm.
The first Enoch is such. I would ask you once again, in the peculiar and sometimes strange English pronunciation of the proper names.
Yeah.
That's Enoch or Enoch?
Enoch.
Enoch.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Let's look at Enoch. Do you see now the text of Enoch?
Mhm.
Yes, that's the introduction to the scene where Enoch receives a revelation from above about the spirits and all other marvelous things that he sees. That's the geographical location for the revelation. And they went and sat at the waters of Dan, in the land of Dan, which is from the right side of West Hermonium. And he was reading the record of their requests, and a dream came to him. It was here done, and Mount Hermon, though Caesarea Philippi is not mentioned as such, but Enoch's revelation was also in this region at the foot of Mount Hermon.
And of course, from Dan to Beersheba, is a common Old Testament term for the whole north-south extent of the land of Israel.
Yes.
So it's
And
in the extreme north, yeah.
the extreme north, but probably the symbolic meaning of this is not this is the northwestern point of Israel, but rather that this is just at the foot of the biggest mountain here.
Yeah, okay, could be. But I think, sometimes isn't in Old Testament also, isn't the north itself associated with Revelation? Maybe I'm thinking of some other myths.
Yes, at least the very name for north, Safon,
Uh-huh. All
in
right.
the Hebrew, is really connected to the Mount Tsapanu, which in Ugaritic texts is regarded as the dwelling place of Ugaritic gods.
So it's a mythic place.
Yes, north is the place of mountains, and these mountains are the dwelling place of God, and the mountain closest to us, Mount Hermon, figures here, or at least the area just below Hermon figures here as the place of revelation through Peter about the messianic dignity of Jesus.
And I think I mentioned in my commentary also the before Caesarea Philippi was renamed Caesarea Philippi, its name was Panias, present-day Banias, but Pan is from the Greek god Pan, who had there's a cave there, that was sacred to Pan. So on the Greco-Roman side too, it's associated with a god and maybe with revelation.
Yes, and even though that's the passage, the pericope, that we'll talk about not today, and probably even not during our next meeting, but the scene of transfiguration.
Right.
Of course, in later creation exegesis, transfiguration is linked with Mount Tabor, but nowhere in the Gospels or other early Christian literature it is explicitly identified with Tabor, and take into account the fact that just before the scene of transfiguration, we had this dialogue between Jesus and his disciples in Caesarea Philippi. It would be much more logical and at the same time much more in line with mountains as places of revelation. If we place the Transfiguration not at Mount Tabor, which of course is a nice mountain, but not so high as Mount Hermon, but rather at Mount Hermon.
Makes sense. Yep.
So I think that in many cases the exact location of a particular narrative from the Gospels is not important, but here probably it's quite important.
Mhm.
And one more reference that I also took from your commentary, Joel.
And I took it from somebody else, I'm sure.
Yes, probably.
I think I cite Nicholsburg, for some of this.
Yes, you said Nicholasberg for Enoch,
Mhm.
and then I'll bring your commentary to our screen. And then you also mentioned that a later Jewish tradition speaks of the miraculous fall of a gate
Uh,
in
uh,
Panias as a sign of the coming of Messiah.
Huh.
Once again, the association of this place with the coming of Messiah is quite relative for our narrative, where Jesus is identified as Messiah.
yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yes, I'm very grateful to you for this reference, though probably it was also discovered many decades or even centuries ago, but still
Yeah.
it's interesting. And I found the place in Sanhedrin that you referred to, and I thought that it might be good for us to read this context, not only because of the fact that it somehow mentions Pennias, but also a lot of other things that may be relevant for our discussion. I'll read English text, though those who want can follow me in Talmudic Hebrew. Rabbi Yosaiba and Kishma's students asked him, "When will the son of David come?" He said, "I am hesitant. Let's request from me a sign." Shema Tavakshu Mimeni Ot. And remember that the sign of the coming of Messiah is also quite important in the gospel tradition, not only in Mark. They say to him, "We are not asking you for a sign." Rabbi Yosai ben Kishma said to them, "You will see when this existing gate of Rome falls and will be rebuilt and will fall a second time and will be rebuilt and will fall a third time. And they will not manage to rebuild it until the son of David comes." Also, the topic of some distractions being connected and related to the coming of Messiah is not too far from some topics that we encounter in the gospel narratives. The students said to him, "Our Rabbi, give us a sign." He said, "But didn't you say to me that you're not asking me for a sign?" And then he said to him, he told them, "If it is, as I say, the water of the cave of Pemias will be transformed into blood." And Gemara relates, and it was transformed into blood.
I love the way, he says, "Well, I'm afraid you're going to ask a sign from me." And they say, "No, we're not going to ask a sign." And then he tells them what's going to happen in the future. And then they say, "Okay, but anyway, give us a sign." And he does, and the sign happens. So, I mean, there's always this kind of rabbinic ambiguity and ambivalence and about signs, which I think you see also in the New Testament.
Yes, that's true. The link between the famous cave of Pamias, which is of course nothing else as the famous cave near Caesarea Philippi, from where one of the sources of river Jordan comes.
Mhm.
The reference, the link between the coming of Messiah and the cave in Panias is not as clear here as we would like, and probably even not as clear as one might infer from your commentary. And that Jewish tradition speaks of the miraculous fall of a gate in Panias as a sign of the coming of the Messiah. But still, some link. There's a sort of a tradition that links this particular place and its environments with revelations, apocalypses, and messianic deeds.
What do you think of me using a tradition recorded in the Babylonian Talmud to illuminate something in the New Testament, which of course is, centuries earlier than the publication of the Babylonian Talmud? I mean, this
Yeah.
is
The traditions may well be there, continue for centuries. Unfortunately, we do not have earlier narrative materials. Mishnah is not a narrative, and it's more about halacha than about Haggadah, and traditions like this would be more in place in the Talmud discussions than Mishnaic legislation.
yes, I mean that's the sort of reasoning I've used, but there are some like Joseph Fitzmyer who are very skeptical about using any rabbinic traditions to illuminate the New Testament just because of this dating problem.
I'll I must go for a minute and I'll return.
Okay. Maria, what do you think of me using Talmudic traditions to illuminate New Testament?
I wanted to ask, what do you think about whether authors of Talmud could be acquainted with New Testament tradition?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's also another possibility, and it's a possibility that's been mooted. Yeah.
Okay, so was this possibility discussed?
I mean, I guess this comes up, for example, when I was working on Passover and Last Supper, the question of, was there a Seder tradition that could have influenced the New Testament already? Or, some have suggested that it's the other way around,
Yeah.
that the Last Supper that has influenced the development of the Seder. So there's these, what we call chicken and egg questions.
Yeah, that's true.
Who's influenced who? I mean, it depends on each particular instance, what sort of, but I guess, for me, you find these things in the New Testament that are puzzling and you can't figure out what the connections are. And then you see a later passage from the Talmud that if it did exist earlier, it kind of explains these puzzling connections. And so I guess that's how I justify using a later text
Fair point.
to fill in the gaps of an earlier text. But, it's a big methodological discussion, and some people, like I mentioned Joe Fitzmyer, he was just very, very negative about using rabbinic traditions. Though most of these people, then you'll see them sometimes using later classical or Greek traditions to illuminate New Testament. So,
And how Fitzmyer explains these connections?
which
Uh, not connections, agreements between New Testament and rabbinic tradition.
well, I don't think he goes into it. I think he just says, look, this is methodologically
Okay.
not okay. So he was always, and he was an expert on Aramaic
Yeah, I know.
sources. Yeah, I know, but so he would always use like if he could find something from Genesis Apocryphon or then he was happier. And I'm always happier if I can find an earlier source also, but the Talmud is just so rich with traditions that it's like a treasure house.
Yes, Joel, I think that in the passage that we just saw, we can return to it. Wait a second. There are things that even that we cannot, on the one hand, they're strikingly close to the New Testament. This request of a sign to corroborate the statements related to messianic age and so on and so on. This this cannot be a pure coincidence.
Yeah, I agree.
But on the other hand, Marsha asked an interesting question of whether some New Testament traditions might have influenced the rabbinical tradition. Probably at some points one can ask questions like this, but I do not think we can say that in this case, in the case of signs related to the coming of Messiah, the later Jewish tradition could have been informed by the images borrowed from Christian scriptures. I think this would be too illogical. So the only thing that we can say that the fact that there is a correspondence between the topic of signs in the gospel traditions and the topic of signs here is that there really was that topic of signs related to Messiah and his coming in the Jewish tradition, the turn of the era, which on the one hand was reflected in the New Testament, on the other hand, many centuries later, but in the Talmudic legends.
Well, yeah, and it makes sense that if there was if some people thought Jesus might be the Messiah, they would want a sign that he was. So, just in terms of logic, it makes sense. And then you see the actual request for sign in later rabbinic traditions, and I think it does corroborate, the basic trustworthiness of the demand for a sign in the Gospels. That's the sort of thing that would have happened.
But the particular tradition shapes this. So I do not think that this may be pure coincidence. There was some common cultural background for the passage, the Talmudic passage we're looking at, and for the gospel narratives that we have in mind.
I think Maria was going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this template, the template for this scene of hesitation about sign, request for the sign on the one hand, and then refusing, and then they receive a sign in a way is Isaiah 7, where the very same composition exists. So first Isaiah says to Ahaz, ask for the sign, and
Right.
then Ahaz refuses to ask it, and then he receives the most famous messianic sign from Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah, that's a good connection. I mean, people often say that Messiah that term was not associated with miracles in the pre-Christian period. But that would be a counterexample. But often people will point to the image of Moses. Moses worked signs before Pharaoh. And so they'll say that in the Messiah image from the New Testament, you have the coming together of, on the one hand, the Messiah king sort of expectation, but also the Mosaic and the prophet like Moses expectation from Deuteronomy coming together.
I would like to agree with Marie that there is a topic in the Old Testament that a sign of something should be given, ought. This is not only in Isaiah 7, for example, in the book of Exodus, the Jews, Moses asks the Lord for a sign that would corroborate what God said to Moses. So one might have said that both the Talmud and the New Testament, independently from each other, were influenced by these passages from the Old Testament. But this
Is
this
but
Talmudic tradition and the New Testament have more than just the topic of ought, the sign common. They have also inside the link between this sign and Messiah. The topic of Messiah and the topic of sign, both in the New Testament and in this Talmudic tradition, go together. I think this would rather be an argument that this is not two independent reflections of the Old Testament motif, but rather a reflection of something that was in common at the common origin of these two traditions, New Testament and the Talmud.
yeah, I agree with that. So just for a second, back to Isaiah 7. Is there a link with the Messiah concept there?
Yeah, of course.
How is that? What's the link?
Emmanuel.
Okay. Emmanuel, which is interpreted in Christian tradition and maybe in some Talmudic traditions.
You mean whether there is in Hebrew text?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's fair question. It's more difficult, of course. Yeah, but
I mean, certainly that passage is invoked in Matthew's birth narrative.
yes.
So in Christian tradition, it's linked with Messiah.
Uh,
But I'm not aware of pre-Christian Jewish traditions that interpret Isaiah 7 messianically.
yeah. I actually I don't remember about Qumranic tradition. I think it's not a messianic. In Qumranic tradition, there are some people who think that in the Septuagint there are some messianic overtones, and the others who think that there are no messianic overtones in the Septuagint. So it's very questionable. Yeah.
I mean,
so
yeah,
that's true. But I'm sure that this passage, we know for sure that it is starting with from 1st century CE. It was interpreted as a messianic passage, and so.
Well, and I think it comes up in Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho. You know, it's a matter of discussion between Justin and Trypho, between the Jewish and the Christian members of this debate about whether it is.
So your question is whether this text is considered messianic in late Jewish tradition.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about. I'm going to get my copy of
not
Justin
quite about that.
Yeah.
This passage from Sanhedrin that you referred to in your commentary, because of the mentioning of the cave of Banias. This is the place in Sanhedrin which is generally related to the topic of Messiah and his coming. And if you look closer at this passage, you'll have some more motifs that have some closeness to the gospel tradition and even especially to our place. For example, just before this mention of the cave of Banias, we have the following story. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Elijah, when the Messiah come, Elijah said to him, go and ask him.
Mm.
Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked, and where is he sitting? At the entrance of the city of Rome. And what is his identifying sign? He sits among the poor who suffer from illnesses. It's not too far from the image that we have of Jesus in the Gospels. And then
When I think he's identified as a leper later on in this passage, maybe. And that people think that sometimes make a connection with Isaiah 53 and this image of the Messiah identifying himself with the sick.
yes, it's important because in popular Christian apologetic literature, we often read the statement that for the Jews at that time, Messiah was represented as a powerful person who would be the leader of the national war, holy war against Rome and so on and so on. But here, this image of the Messiah who sits among the poor and among those who suffer from illnesses is in fact much closer to the image of Christ that we have in the Gospels. And then this whole text before we come to the mention of the cave of Banias, that's about Messiah and Elijah together. The rabbis ask Elijah when the Messiah come, and Elijah redirects them to Messiah, while Messiah redirects them to Elijah. Once again, this constellation of ideas of closeness of Elijah to Messiah and the signs of messianic coming. These are motives that we know from the New Testament, and the fact that these motives that are known to us from the New Testament, that they cluster together just in one page or something. This may also reflect some common world of ideas and images.
Yes, I do think that's important, that it's not just one image or motif, but it's several coming together that also come together in New Testament texts.
I think that this constellation of the motifs would also probably be an argument in favor of your position that we should take Talmud seriously, even though there are centuries between the New Testament and the Talmud.
So don't throw your copy of Strock-Billerbeck away.
Exactly. By the way, do you know of any more recent collection that may be
Yeah, I think these people at Hebrew University, Serge somebody or other, were working on, and they maybe even have some of it online, a revision of Strauch-Billerbeck or a new thing like Strauch-Billerbeck that supposedly doesn't have the problems of Strauch-Billerbeck.
You mean Serge Ruser?
I think it may be him. Yeah,
Okay.
and his graduate students.
I know him. He's originally from Moscow, and of course he belongs to another generation, but he's a good friend of some people whom I know here in Moscow. He was their good friend even before he emigrated to Israel.
I met him once, and I've used. He has a couple of articles I like about the background of the concept of love of neighbor in Second Temple Judaism and the New Testament, which I think are valuable.
Yes. Okay. We looked at the geographic location of this scene. If there are no more questions and ideas with regard to the verse that we have read, let's move to the dialogue itself.
Дальше читаем.
Да.
Гойде эйпан ауто легонтес готи Иоаннен тон баптистен кай алой Илиан алойде готи эйстон профетон.
Давайте тогда читаем до конца.
Кай аутос эперота аутус Юмеis de tine melegete einai. Apokritеis ho Petros legi auto su ei ho Христос.
Давайте с 30 тоже прочтем.
Кай апетимесен autois yine medeni legosin peri autu.
Да. Иисусовы ученики направились в селение близ Кесарии Филипповой. По дороге он спросил учеников. Или, может быть, вот здесь стал спрашивать скорее, да? Что нам скажут коллеги, классики? То, что здесь у нас вот именно такое употреблено время. Это у нас о чем-то говорит?
Может быть, спрашивал.
Спрашивал или стал спрашивать? Собственно говоря, русское «спрашивал» в такого рода контекстах, видимо, как раз тот же самый имперфектум деканату. Нет?
Ну да.
Стал спрашивать, может быть? Что скажете?
Не знаю, почему вам не нравится именно имперфект? Он несколько раз спрашивает.
Вы думаете, имеется в виду, что он один и тот вопрос повторял по несколько раз?
Ну, почему один и тот же? Может, по-разному.
А почему вы перевели Excelthen, словно бы это имперфект? Жанрист все-таки.
А как я перевел? Я перевел «направились». По-русски это прошедшее время совершенного вида. То есть наиболее точный аналог
Да.
именно
Нет,
аульс.
да, конечно, да.
По-моему, так хорошо, я сейчас стал спрашивать учеников.
Хорошо. И вот еще маленький у меня был вопрос к самому себе, когда я над этим делал. У нас же, помните, вот это «эксерхомай» – это такой постоянный глагол у Марка, да?
Иисус только и делает, что куда-то выходит все время.
Да-да-да, причем именно не идет, короче, а именно выходит, да? Можно просто посмотреть, что почти с другими префиксами у нас это дело не встречается. Вот, и встречается чаще, чем, можно посмотреть, по-моему, беспрефиксальная форма, да, то есть все время куда-то выходит. Но не знаю, как это перевести по-русски, так чтобы это... Может быть, отправились, кстати, если не направились, а отправились, по крайней мере,
Да,
прекрасно.
Да, вот это лучше.
Да, хорошо. Может, кстати, в других местах, где у нас есть эксерпомой по-гречески, передавать это как отправились, вот чтобы вот это самое от передавать, да, он все время куда-то отправляется, выходит из какого-то места находится. Окей.
I have a question about the translation of eperota. So you changed it to stal sprashivats
Да.
because to convey the notion of the imperfect of ongoing or repeated action in the past. Is that right?
Yes.
And
Something like this.
and I guess the question is, I mean, one theory I've heard is that, I mean, verbs of speaking often use the imperfect rather than the aorist because the act of speaking itself is a continuous action. See what I'm so that I'm not sure that it needs to be stal sprashivats or the sprashival, whatever you were talking about before. It's just, you know, Greeks conceived of speaking as a continuous activity in itself.
Yes, but
I mean, probably in this context, it is good to, however, you know, to have this connotation of continuity or repeated because the impression is that there was an ongoing discussion going on as they're walking up to Jerusalem. So I guess I come out on agreeing with the change to stal sprashivats.
okay, but I think we should look at the statistics, for example, how often verbs like Lego
Yeah.
are used in imperfect and how often they're used in aorist.
See, I think with Lego, Mark generally either has the historic present or the imperfect. I think much more rarely, well, I don't think he ever uses FA, you know, which is the common aorist form. And I'm not sure that there's any difference in meaning between lege in the historic present and elegen in the imperfect.
Yes, but wait a second. Example, if we look at let's just look at Lego in Mark briefly. One Lego. Many participles, but ape,
All right, yeah, apen, yeah, okay.
ape, quite a lot of participles and historical, present historical. Lego, legendos.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting, and I don't think I've ever done this, to look at the instances of apen,
Mhm.
which is not as common as the instances of Lego, and try to figure out why he uses apen in those instances and not Lego or elegen.
Yeah, I checked eperotao, our verb, and it looks like in Mark it's used mostly in imperfect, and sometimes in aoristos, and in Luke the other way around, mostly in aoristos and sometimes in imperfect.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's very common verb, so it would.
Can you share the screen with us?
Yeah, or you can check eperotao. It's maybe it's easier to do it on your screen.
Wait a second. I gave you the permission. It will be probably easier for you just to share the screen.
Yeah, so Mark loved this word much more than erotao without prefix, and we can see that he uses mostly imperfect and sometimes aoristos.
Yeah.
In some cases, eperotosan, and here it is Luke. Luke here. Okay. Yeah, starting from here, he uses only aoristos. Eperotosan, and only sometimes aoristos, imperfect.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think imperfect is a more informal tense, or it maybe.
Maybe it's more dynamic because Mark is more.
Yeah. It more conjures up an image of, it's more cinematic.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Of course, the problem with tenses, both in Hebrew and in Greek, is much more difficult. But it's an interesting topic.
Mm.
Commentators and scholars usually pay more attention to lexical meanings, verbs, verbal tenses, and so on and so on.
Pay more attention maybe than the author paid.
And this brings us to the question, what do we mean by author? Because quite often, for example, when we choose this or that tense, we do not make a conscious decision, but it is some subconscious motive that enters here into play when we choose this or that tense.
Yeah, but what is interesting is, like the sort of comparison Maria was making between Mark and Luke, where Mark is the source of most of these, and then you see Luke changing it to an aorist sometimes, and you wonder why.
Ну, кстати сказать, вот имперфект глаголов речи, в частности, ротау, грамматика позволяет же переводить как аорист, как законченное действие.
Да.
Это относится именно к глаголам речи.
Как раз речь идет.
К легу это тоже относится.
Okay.
Мне кажется, что здесь стал спрашивать лучше еще потому, что есть как то, что мы в прошлый раз обсуждали, есть некоторая прогрессия, если угодно. Вот они вышли, и вот это НОДО, оно как-то, мне кажется, указывает именно на какой-то как бы следующий этап. Вот стали спрашивать, потому что если сохранить несовершенный вид спрашивали, это бы наводило на мысль о том, что спрашивали не раз, что здесь возможно, но тогда именно это мы, видимо, и должны будем выражать. То есть выбор между стал спрашивать, вот именно в данном случае, по-моему, он очевиден, между тем это один вопрос стал спрашивать, или раз за разом, ну вот, как говорится, итеративно или деканат.
Спасибо. Подробно стал спрашивать учеников, кем люди считают меня. Те отвечали: Иоанном Крестителем, а другие, что Илья, третий, что кто-то из пророков. Заметим, что здесь Эйпан, да? Хотя, мне кажется, по-русски, просто русская стилистика требует несовершенного вида здесь. Потому что звучит несколько ответов. И он спросил их. Опять же у нас «Катос эперот аутус». Может, здесь тоже принято, как он стал спрашивать?
Михаил Георгиевич, мне кажется, вот этот момент, может быть, лучше больше подчеркнуть вот в 29 стихе «Кай аутос эперота», да, то есть, может быть, например, тогда он спросил их. То есть вот чтобы эту поэтапность, о котором было только что сказано, подчеркнуть.
В таком случае, следуя той модели перевода, которую видели в Септуагинте, переводим слово «ауто» с русским словом «тогда». Сохраним количество слов, но и сохранение эмфасис.
Но если убрать «и», то тогда это будет вместо «кай».
По-моему, и здесь хорошо.
Пускай
Это-
стоит.
Вот, что касается глаголов, то действительно, видимо, у нас здесь э, какая-то другая логика руководит выбором имперфекта и аориста в греческом, чем так, что нам казалось бы естественной для русского повествования, да? Когда ученики ему несколько разных ответов предлагают, то не эйпон, аорист, а когда он им задает один вопрос, то это эперота, имперфект.
Но я прошу прощения, но вот это те отвечали, если не в современном смысле, понимаете, а несколько в архаическом, то он отвечал, это фактически совершенный вид по смыслу.
Ну да. Да, конечно, мы здесь входим еще в дебри науки под названием «русский вид». Вот. Хорошо. Тогда он спросил их, а вы меня кем считаете? Петр ответил ему, ты мессия. Я думаю, что это тот случай, когда, несмотря на то, что слово «Христос» вошло в русский язык и в европейские языки, но правильным переводом должен быть перевод «мессия». Иначе это будет смотреться по-русски не как подтверждение мессианского статуса, а как, поскольку уже слово «Христос» стало конкретно эпитетом одного конкретного претендента на роль мессии, это почти как сообщить кому-то, как его зовут.
А почему не перевести его как помазанник, например?
Ну, потому что я люблю про это рассказывать студентам, что еврейское «машиах» у нас в русский язык пошло в 4 разных вариантах, как помазанник, как мессия, как Христос и как Машиах. Вот. Но в каждом из 4 передач свой оттенок. И у нас помазанник вошел в русский язык через славянский, в славянский через греческий, но практически исключительно в скорее таком секулярно-ветхозаветном употреблении. То есть царь, помазанный на царство. Не зря же мы говорим там мессианский секрет, а не помазаннический секрет. Вот. Мне кажется, что именно для того, о чем здесь идет речь, слово «мессия» лучше всего подходит.
Но тогда, может быть, стоит заменить Христос на Мессия во всех тех 5 местах, когда оно встречается у Марка, потому что у Марка это довольно редкое слово. Вот. И во всех этих 5 местах это такой, в кавычках, догматический диалог, то есть кто есть Христос. Тогда во всех случаях пускай Мессия будет.
Да, мне кажется, за исключением первой строки, первого стиха Марка, я так и сделал. Давайте посмотрим. У нас у Марка это Марк 1. Вот, но я здесь
Тогда
если
6 раз получается, я не посчитала Марк 1.
об Иисусе Христе, Сыне Божьем. Дальше у нас вот Марк 8:29, о котором мы говорим. Марк 9:41. У нас еще тут будет. 9:41. Как нам поступить здесь?
Не видно греческий текст.
Простите. Греческий текст не видно.
Ну,
А.
там есть стихи.
Да. Это прошла какая-то перебивка. Секунду.
Я уже открыла книжку.
Мгм. Вот это интересный вопрос, что делать здесь. Потому что такое ощущение, что вот этот конкретный абзац, он очень хорошо вписывается в представление о том, что кое-где в Евангелии от Марка у нас находят отражение какие-то вещи, которые же больше характерны для жизни раннехристианских общин, да? Вот странствуют проповедники, их поют чашкой воды, с того, что они ученики Христа. Very interesting, Joel, how to translate Greek Christos in Russian.
Yeah.
My idea is that in some places where it refers to the time, to the situation, to the state of the tradition, where Jesus' identity or the identity of the coming Messiah is still in question, we should retain Messiah, but when the passage is too linked with the early Christian setting, then we should rather translate as Christ.
Мне кажется, еще когда нет артикля, это как имя, нет? А не как титул.
Yeah, I think I used Christ throughout my translation because it's too difficult to decide between the two things that you just mentioned, I mean, Christos is the Greek translation of Moshiach, they both mean the anointed one. And of course now John does have, it's interesting, John's the only New Testament work which uses the term Messias in translation.
Yeah.
Only in two passages, one in chapter 1 and one in chapter 4. Elsewhere he uses Christos. And in both cases, I guess maybe this corresponds to what you were saying. In both cases, it's said by people who don't yet, at least, or who are just beginning to identify Jesus as the Messiah. Right? Nathaniel in John 1:41 and the Samaritan woman in 4:25.
Joel, I remember that there is some discrepancy between use of Christus with article and without article.
Yeah, I think some people argue that.
Okay. Yeah, because
and yeah, there's
that at least in Mark, in some places it is like a name, So in this case, it's Jesus Christ, and sometimes it's like
Yeah.
title, messianic title, and so it should be
Right.
translated Messiah. And in this case, it's usually with the definite article.
Right. I mean, some people have argued that already in Paul's letters, it
Yeah.
becomes like Jesus' second name.
Yeah.
But there has been pushback in the last 20 years from Matthew Novenson did his dissertation on, I think it was on, the term Christ in Paul, and he argued that it is, and he wasn't the first one, that it's titular, it's a title and not just a second name, but it is, I mean, certainly by the 2nd or 3rd century, the sense of it as a Jewish title has vanished. But the question is if that's already happening in the New Testament. But I'm not sure that the distinction between the definite article and not the definite article is, if that works, that, if it works to say that the definite article is the title and without the definite article is just a second name.
А можно очень наивный вопрос к 41 стиху? А то, что там все-таки в греческом тексте учеников нет, и просто вот этот вот, что вы Христовы, так решительно переведено, что вы именно ученики, это, то есть это вот, само собой, да?
Может быть, это действительно момент, который стоит к нему вернуться. Но нам еще нужно дойти до стиха 9:41. Мы же здесь тоже с Иисусом двигаемся по этому нарративу.
Я поняла, потому что у меня была сначала мысль, что именно в сочетании с учениками, может быть, это именно наверняка уже Христос, а не Мессия, а потом я увидела, что, собственно, в греческом тексте-то этого и нет. И, соответственно, кто может быть, кто может принадлежать, понятно, в каком смысле, Мессии. То есть в него можно верить, а кто могут быть его люди? Ну, не знаю, повторяю, это очень наивный вопрос.
Хорошо. Давайте я подумаю, может быть, в тот момент, когда мы дойдем до этого стиха, я его в контексте того, о чем вы сейчас говорите, немножко перепишу. Вот. Да. И тогда он спросил их: а вы меня кем считаете? Петр ответил ему: ты Мессия. Вот. Здесь мы подошли вот как раз к самому этому важному climactic moment всего, про что мы сейчас говорили. И, наверное, сейчас нам как раз придется поставить точку в нашей встрече, потому что мне вот только что известили, что у нас через несколько минут наш Zoom кончается. К сожалению, не мой личный, а принадлежит нашей организации. И там у нас
Can I
подвинулись.
ask, Mikhail, where else did you translate Christos as Messias in your translation? Was there somewhere else that?
I think it was only here.
Right.
In other places, I retained the traditional wording.
I think maybe the recent English translations use Messiah sometimes, but that's a change, and I think it has to do with recognizing the Jewish background of the title.
In any case, this is really the climactic passage of our narrative, and that's where I think we are to put a pause for today. For technical reasons, I was just told that our Zoom account will expire in a couple of minutes.
I I will be traveling next Thursday, so I can't join you.
Okay, and the Thursday afterwards,
Pardon me?
and Thursday afterwards. So, can we count on meeting in 2 weeks?
That's good for me. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll continue in 2 weeks from the point where we started, where we stopped today, and by that time we will try to solve somehow our problems with our account. Maybe we can find another Zoom account for our meetings.
You could use my account. I have like unlimited.
Oh, that's fine.
So
Thank you. So we meet in 2 weeks in your account, and you will send us
a link. Yeah.
the link. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Will do.
Then thank you, and it
До
was nice
свидания.
to see all of you. Было очень приятно всех видеть. И
Спасибо.
До
праведников.
свидания.
Спасибо огромное.
Спасибо.
Спасибо. Окей.
Спасибо, до свидания.